Hey there! Welcome to this week's message from Centralia Christian Church. We are so glad that you are listening, and we hope this message will encourage and inspire you to walk closer with Jesus. Now sit back, relax, and let's dive into the Word together.
Hey, you didn't squeal at everybody this time. I woke everybody up in first service. Can you hear me, Jay? Absolutely. Awesome. How's everybody doing? Wonderful. It's the first day of the new year. It's been so long, I haven't seen anybody since last year. Well, Happy New Year's to you all, and I'm glad you're here with us this morning. I'm Nate. I'm the associate pastor here at Centralia Christian Church, and I'm so excited that I get to talk to you guys today. But I got two things I need to tell you before we get started. The first is due to my own forgetfulness, which will be ironic in a second. We actually forgot to put the kids' worship activity sheets out, but that has been corrected. So if you are in the service and you have kids with you and you would like some of those activity sheets, they are back next to the bulletins now. So I apologize for that. Second of all, I need to tell you that today's sermon is a standalone message. Next week, Brad will be back with us, and he'll be introducing our series for January. But today is not connected necessarily to next week's series. So if it connects, great. If it doesn't, I didn't want you to be spending 10 minutes trying to figure out the connections between them. There may not be any. So I just wanted to warn you of that before we get started. So today is January 1st. Of 2023. It's weird saying that. It's a brand new year. But it's also a time when many people are making New Year's resolutions. And by the end of the year, many people have completely forgotten what New Year's resolutions they made and maybe not have even tried to keep them. Which brings up the point that us humans, we often tend to forget things, don't we? For example, we often forget where we put things, or we often forget what we went to the store to get, at least until 5 minutes after we walk out of the store. We often forget people's names. Please tell me I'm not alone in this. And do you know that on average, people have 70,000 thoughts a day? And there was a study in 2001 that showed that left-handed people often have better memories than other people do. Thought that was kind of interesting. But here are the 10 things that people most often forget, at least according to one article I read. They forget why they entered a room or where they parked. They forget to get food out of the freezer. They forget people's names, phone numbers, what to buy at the grocery store. Sometimes they forget to pay bills or to feed their plants or fish. They forget birthdays or anniversaries, and they forget phones, keys, or wallets and purses. These are the 10 things people most often forget. And some commonly misplaced items also include TV remotes, car or house keys, shoes, wallets or purses, glasses, and phones. I tend to misplace these quite often in my life. And this blew my mind. But the average person will spend over the course of their life 2.5 days looking for something that they misplaced. So that equals out to about 60 hours over the course of an average person's life that they spend looking for things. Now, some bad influences on our memory include things like depression or alcohol, lack of sleep, medications, or even stress. And on the other side of that, things like exercise or good sleep, or even just reviewing the information you're trying to remember are ways to help your memory. And if information isn't your thing, don't worry, this is the last thing I have. But unless they are interested in a topic, as of 2017, adults have an attention span of 20 minutes. Unless they are interested in a topic, the average adult's attention span is 20 minutes. And 10 years before that, that number was 32 minutes. Now we're down to 20 or maybe even less now. So we as humans, we forget an incredible amount of stuff. But someone we should never forget is God. Wait, so Nate, you're telling me that it's possible to forget God? Well, yes, I am. Because there were, in fact, people in the Bible who forgot God. A whole nation, in fact. And it didn't take generations, it didn't take years or months. In most cases, it took days and sometimes hours for them to forget God. And those people are the nation of Israel. So we're going to look at some of what happened to them and see what we can learn from it. So our main passage today will be Deuteronomy 8:11 through 20. And I will have this is our main passage. We'll be in some others. I'll have most of them up on the screen behind me, not all of them. But at least most of them will be up behind me. We're going to start in Deuteronomy 8:11 through 20. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I am commanding you today. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied and have built good houses and lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold multiply, and all that you have multiplies, then your heart will become proud, and you'll forget the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness, with its fiery serpents and scorpions, and thirsty ground where there was no water. He brought water for you out of the rock of flint. In the wilderness he fed you manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and he might test you to do good for you in the end. Otherwise, you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. It shall come about, if you ever forget the Lord your God, and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that you shall surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so you shall perish, because you would not listen to the voice of the Lord your God. So here in this passage, there's actually a lot going on, and I won't even be able to address all of it today, but we have some important words, and we have some warnings and consequences given to Israel. So Moses is speaking to the nation of Israel. By this time, Israel has left Egypt. They've gone through the Red Sea. They've gone through the desert. They've been to Mount Sinai. They've tried to attack the Promised Land after they doubted God, and they ended up wandering in the desert for 40 years. So finally, Israel is finally ready to enter the Promised Land. But Moses won't be going with them. So he's taking the time before they enter the land to warn them, to remind them of everything they've been through, everything they've done wrong, everything God has done for them, and the things they need to learn, they need to remember as they go into the Promised Land. Because otherwise, they'll turn out just like their fathers did, and they'll wander away from God again. They'll forget God. So the important words we have in this passage are forget and remember. And there are many words that the dictionary does not do justice to with its definitions. But it's good to look at the dictionary definitions as a base. So for forget, the dictionary says, forget means to fail to remember, or to accidentally neglect to do, or neglect to bring or mention something. But in Hebrew, there's way more to this idea of forgetting than just an accident. In fact, much of the time, the way it's used in the Old Testament, the idea of forgetting isn't some accidental act or some lapse of memory. Instead, the idea of forgetting is chasing the opposite of what is needed. So here in Deuteronomy, Moses tells Israel that they can forget God by doing the exact opposite of everything God tells them to do. And the dictionary says that remember is to be able to bring to one's mind an awareness of. I'm not positive exactly of what that means, but the Hebrew idea of remember involved action. It didn't just mean to have in your mind. I remember when I was in college, I could recall information that I'd crammed for the night before for a test, but according to this, that would mean I didn't remember it, because if you remember it, that means it's affecting your life. It's causing you to act on it. So how exactly did Israel forget God? How did Israel chase the opposite of what God wanted? I believe Deuteronomy 8 lays out some ways that Israel did this. First of all, they ignored God's commands. So Deuteronomy 8:11 says, "Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I am commanding you today." Problem is that time and time again, Israel does exactly this. God would give them a command, they might follow it for a time, and then they would do the exact opposite. For example, God gave Israel manna, and one of his instructions was, only gather as much as you need for that day. So what did Israel do? They tried to gather enough for the next day as well, and all of it went bad and they couldn't eat it. Or God told Israel not to take wives from foreign nations. So what did Israel do? They turned around and they married foreign women. Or when they entered the promised land, God told Israel to completely wipe out all of the nations in the promised land, because otherwise those nations would pull them away from God. Well, Israel started doing this, but as soon as it got hard, they just gave up and left those people alone. And those people, crazy enough, ended up taking Israel away from God. And later, Israel decided that they needed a king instead of God, and that ended up leading them to hundreds of years of idolatry. And Israel also followed other gods. It shall come about, if you ever forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that you will surely perish. Now, this problem set in almost immediately for Israel, and it never really went away. By the time Israel got to Mount Sinai, Moses goes up the mountain, and Israel decides that God forgot about them. So they build a golden calf to worship instead. Or whenever Israel ended up near another nation for an extended period of time, they would end up serving the gods of those nations. And by the time of the kings, we see that Israel followed almost any false god of the nations around them. If you look at the gods that the nations around Israel worshipped, Israel was worshiping almost all of those as well. And later they paid the price for it, almost like Deuteronomy warned them about. Israel also became comfortable and feared things other than God. And so for this, we're going to look at what Isaiah in chapter 51 says. I, even I, am he who comforts you. Who are you that you are afraid of man who dies, and of the Son of Man who is made like grass? That you have forgotten the Lord your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. That you fear continually all day long because of the fury of the oppressor, as he makes ready to destroy. But where is the fury of the oppressor? The Israelites were fine while they were in Egypt, when they were on their way out of Egypt. They were fine following God. But as soon as they left and faced a shortage of water or food, their first action was to complain about it and say they wish they were back in Egypt. They wish they were back in slavery where they were comfortable. Or as soon as Israel took control of the promised land and their leaders died, Joshua, the elders who led Israel, as soon as all of them died, Israel almost immediately stopped following God. And the entire book of Judges is built on this idea that Israel got comfortable and then they started fearing things other than God. So God sent a nation to oppress Israel, and then Israel would come back to God, and then Israel would wander away again. And Israel ended up fearing people sometimes more than they feared God. So how did Israel remember God? And the idea that they forgot God doesn't mean that they woke up one day and couldn't remember God's name or who he was. They were chasing the opposite of what God commanded. But how did they remember God? And this idea of remembering again involves action. It's not just something in your mind. It should affect your life and what you do. And Israel was fine at remembering God at first. Even when they entered the promised land, they were attacking other nations like God told them to. They were following God when some of the tribes of Israel looked like they were wandering away, then the rest of Israel would go and bring them back. But when Joshua died, Israel wandered away almost immediately. They quit trying to defeat other nations, they quit worshiping God alone, and they certainly quit keeping God's commands. But later on, there'd be various leaders who would bring Israel back to God, various kings, judges that would bring Israel back to God almost single-handedly. They'd get rid of the idols. They'd bring everybody back to God, following God's commands. And that worked until that leader died. And then Israel would go right back to what they were doing. Oftentimes, Israel's remembrance of God was almost immediately followed by forgetting God. So I want you to look at this with me. It's also in the notes in your bulletin, in case what's on screen is a little small, because I'm good at making things too small on the screen. But on the left side, we have what God did for Israel. And on the right side, we have what Israel's response to that was. Now, this isn't everything God did. It's not necessarily even in chronological order. But this is some of it. So, God killed the firstborn of Egypt. He spared Israel. He got Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery. So Israel responded by leaving until they were trapped up against the Red Sea and thought they were going to be captured. Then they wanted to go back to Egypt and be slaves again. So God parted the Red Sea for them, which I don't know about you, but I've never seen that happen in my life. So what does Israel do? But 3 days later, they're grumbling because they don't have any water left. God ended up giving them quail beyond number for them to eat. So, of course, Israel ate it until it came out their nose. That's the Bible. Not me adding that. The Bible literally says that. Or God gave Israel manna to eat, which no one had ever seen before. So Israel tried to keep more of it than they were allowed to, and then immediately started grumbling because they were out of water again. So God made water come out of a rock for the Israelites to drink. Now, I've never seen that happen either. And the Israelites were thankful for a short time. Or God helped them defeat an entire nation. And Israel just kind of moves on. There's not really any reaction there. God brings Israel to Mount Sinai. What does Israel do? They make a golden calf because they think God forgot about them. Or God brings Israel to the promised land. So Israel responds by being too scared to attack. So they end up wandering in the desert for 40 years. And that's just part of Israel's history. We could go on and look at the judges, look at the kings, and you'll still see more of the same pattern there. Almost every act of God, almost every miracle that God did for Israel was met with forgetfulness. It was met with grumbling, with complaining. The Israelites were so focused on what they did not have that they looked straight past what they did have, what God had given them. And as we can see from reading the rest of the Old Testament, this pattern that Israel established, it did not end well for them. The consequences laid out in Deuteronomy 8 are almost exactly what happens to Israel. Israel becomes proud. They decide that they were the ones who built what they had. For a time, they were possibly the strongest nation in the world. At one point, their army numbered over 1 million people. But just a couple hundred years later, they get beaten by the Assyrians, beaten by the Babylonians, taken out of the promised land. And after that, they're never the same. They were never a very strong nation after that. They were constantly oppressed by other nations. In effect, they suffered the same fate as the nations Israel drove out of the promised land. But all of that is about Israel and how they forgot or sometimes tried to remember God. But that's thousands of years ago. Why does that apply to us? Why should we remember God? And first of all, we should remember God because he will never, ever change. Hebrews 13 says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Now, this is part of a larger discussion, but the author of Hebrews is wrapping up his letter, and he's telling his audience that they need to fix their eyes on Jesus. They need to serve him, not be carried away by every new teaching that comes up. And even though this was written over 1,000 years ago, it's still true today, because God is the only one in the world who will never, ever change. Doesn't matter how many years go by, what happens on this earth, how crazy it gets. Doesn't even matter what we do. God will never, ever change. So why shouldn't we remember him? I mean, wouldn't it be much more worthwhile to remember God who will never change than to spend all our time and energy on something that may not even be here tomorrow? We should also remember God because God is the one who has given us everything. And I'd like to look at James 1, verses 12 through 17. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from God. God has given us everything that we have. And in this passage, James contrasts the bad things that happen, like being tempted or giving in to temptation, and saying that doesn't come from God. But the good things, everything we have, all of that comes from God. Sure, we can try and say that it was our hard work or it was Jay's hard work. Sorry about that. Or we could say that what we have came from this person or from this place or we got a good deal here. But in reality, God has given us everything that we have. Everything. So because of this, it is our job to remember God. Israel was given so many things: food, water, land, miracles that we have never even seen. But as soon as they found the next thing that they wanted, they forgot all of it. And we need to remember what God has given us, what God has done for us, because otherwise we might just follow the pattern of the Israelites. Finally, we must remember God because at the end of our life, that's really the only thing that matters. Ecclesiastes 12 says, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, when you will say, I have no delight in them." Now, this is the final chapter of Ecclesiastes. It's written by Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And Solomon, throughout the course of the book, explains how he tried many different things to try and satisfy him, to try and make his life feel complete. And none of it worked. So here, at the end of the chapter, he says that his conclusion is to remember your Creator. And at the end of all of this discussion, fear God and keep His commandments. What better way to remember God than to fear Him and keep His commandments? And just like Solomon states, at the end of our lives, there really is nothing that matters quite like following and remembering God. Not our wealth, not our house. Following and remembering God. So wouldn't it make sense to devote most of our energy to remembering God if that's the thing that matters? So if that's why we must remember God, then how do we do it? How do we remember God? First, we need to meditate on His Word. We need to meditate on the Bible. Psalms 1 says, "How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in His law he meditates day and night. He will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In whatever he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but they are like chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish." We remember God by meditating on His Word, by being in it daily, by studying it, by interpreting it, by applying it to our lives. That is how we remember God. And indeed, Psalms 1 says that if we do this, we will be blessed. We'll be like a tree planted by water. Our lives, at least spiritually, will flourish. And Israel did not do this. And the results were quite evident in how often they strayed from God and from His Word. So let us not be like the Israelites. Let us be devoted to God's Word. Let us flourish spiritually. Second, we remember God by giving Him everything. And in Matthew 22, these two groups of people, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, kind of the religious rulers of Israel, and they've been having almost a competition to see who can trap Jesus, who can get Him to say the wrong thing, to do the wrong thing. And so one of the Pharisees comes up to Jesus and he says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment of the law?" So Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and prophets." Heart, soul, mind, and the book of Mark adds strength to this as well. These 4 words refer to basically everything we are. These 4 words encompass our inner being, our feelings, our emotions, our desires, our intelligence, our understanding, our capacity, or our power to act. All of those things are wrapped up in heart, soul, mind, and strength. Maybe another way we could summarize this verse is to say, with all that you have, with all that you are, and with all that you can do, love God. We're instructed to give God no less than everything. Everything we are, everything we have, anything less than everything isn't enough. And finally, we love God by not changing even when we have enough. Now, much of the time, there's no such thing as enough. Would you agree with me? At least that's the way most people look at it. We always want more money or more of this, a bigger house or more of that. But when what you have is sufficient to meet your needs, do not forget God. Do not turn away from Him like the Israelites did. They were warned in Deuteronomy 8 that when they had enough, they would be tempted to be proud, to forget God and say, look at all of this, I did that. And that's exactly what Israel did. And wow, did they pay the price for it later. When what we have is sufficient, we still need to remember and be devoted to God. Because there's this weird phenomenon that happens when we get to a place in our life where we're comfortable, where we have enough, when we're satisfied. There's this weird thing that happens where we quit leaning into God. We start to relax. We start to enjoy being comfortable. We start to feel good about where we're at, and so we don't lean into God like we should. And then when things unexpectedly fall off a cliff, we wonder what went wrong. When the first thing that we did wrong was we quit remembering God like we should have. So maybe you're sitting there asking, well, Nate, what exactly is enough? Can I get a number, a dollar figure, something a little more concrete here? And so in response to that, I'd like to read Proverbs 30, verses 7 through 9 for you. 2 things I asked of you, do not refuse me before I die. Keep deception and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is my portion, that I not be full and deny you, and say, who is the Lord? Or that I not be in want and steal and profane the name of my God. Enough. It's neither too much, it's neither too little. And as uncomfortable as this might sound, what the Bible would tell us is enough in our lives might be a lot less than we would like it to be. Israel was told to remember God. They were warned of the consequences for forgetting God. But they still forgot God. They paid the price for it. It did not end well for them. But our job today, this week, this year, is to remember God. God never changes. He's given us everything that we have. And at the end of our lives, nothing is as important as remembering God. Nothing. And we remember God by meditating on His Word, by giving Him everything, and I mean everything, and by still leaning into God when our lives are going well. Because this action, because remembering is an action, this action of remembering God is what will matter most at the end of our lives. And I cannot stress that enough.
We would like to thank you for spending part of your day here with us. Our mission here at Centralia Christian Church is to help people build full-time relationships with Jesus. If you would like more info on the ministry or giving opportunities, visit us online at www.centraliachristian.org.